I want to give you the floor to Miguel Geraldes. Miguel is a member of the Center for Geographical Studies of the University of Lisbon and also a guest member of the Greifswald Mire Centre. Also, Miguel works for the Portuguese Nature Conservation Institute. Miguel has become passionate researcher and conservationist working on peatlands and swobs. With a background in law and biogeography, he is currently merging science and policy into peatland mapping, assessment, distribution models, consultancy, and conservation efforts. Miguel will present us the presentation called Europe's Peatlands Going Global, Wide-Ranging Possibilities that Arise from Novel Peatlands Atlas, an overview. So Miguel, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thanks for the invitation, and good morning, everyone. My presentation will be shown in a little bit. So please just let me know that it's showing fine.
It's working perfect.
Okay, perfect. So good morning again. Today I'm going to talk to you about Europe's peatlands going global. So wide-ranging possibilities that have arisen from the novel Peatland Atlas. I'm going to give you an overview about this and to share with you this magnificent tool that can be used for outreach, for working with local communities, but also with public bodies and private sector, etc. So the Global Peatlands Assessment has been published, the new version has been published recently, and it all started in a very wide movement coordinated by the International Mire Conservation Group, led by people like Hans Joosten, but also Franziska Tanneberger and Asbjørn Munn, the authors. And all this compilation of information about European peatlands has been condensed into this very thick book, which I strongly recommend to purchase and to read, because it contains really, really valuable information, very encompassing and very rich, that can be very useful for people working with peatlands. Also, last year in Sharm el-Sheikh, in the COP, the Peatland assessment was presented, and this is also a very, very important tool for people working with not only peatlands but also wetlands, as it contains very, very worthy information, especially this one, the summary for policymakers. In these projects, like REWET, there is a very strong outreach to the community, and the organization of the information can be very, very, very useful. And of course, the Peatland map of the world. So we can see that there are some major belts, the boreal and in temperate regions you have more peatlands. Also the intertropical, especially with three big focuses, which is the Amazon and the Andes, the Congo Basin, and also Indonesia. But for people like me working in Iberian Peninsula, we also have peatlands. So having this, starting from this overarching view of the world, gives us an impression where most of the peatlands are, and we can relate phenomena. That's a very important point. But before we go more into detail, I would like to talk about some previous questions that sometimes when we work with peatlands we forget. First of all, is that most of the peatlands are invisible. They are beneath the soil. We can step on them, but sometimes we don't see them. And sometimes they have this hybrid classification, because what we see sometimes is a forest or a coastal lagoon or a grassland, and it can sit on several meters of peat. So the classification sometimes poses a problem, not for nature, because nature is functioning, but for us humans that want to preserve some of these places. So bearing this in mind can be an important concept to work with when we are explaining people why there is a peatland and it should be preserved. Also, peatlands are relatively rare in the landscape. They are 3% of the immersed lands of the world, but still they are very diverse. So you can have upper mires, you can have fens, you can have bogs, a lot of types of bogs. You can have transition types, and peatlands are a very, very complex ecosystem. And sometimes in the same place, you can have several types of peatlands only in the same place. Sometimes they can be very large with several square kilometers, and sometimes they can be mesotopes or microtopes or even nanotopes, so to say, very, very small places. All of them deserve conservation. Only recently has the real importance of peatlands to humankind been recognized. So on Kyoto Protocol, we started talking about protecting our carbon sinks, but not all of them. Then on the Paris Agreement, we reached like 60 to 80% of such places should be preserved. But then with the IPCC 2018 report, the panel pointed out to net zero carbon neutrality. So no peatland can be left out of this. All of them should be mapped, assessed, and they should be kept wet. But we'll talk about this later. Also, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework objectives and targets also point to conserve these very rich biodiversity spots. So everything pointing on the direction of conserving and also, when possible, doing restoration. So the assessment is one of the first steps. So the State of the World's Peatlands has been published. It encompasses all continents, and from Europe we can get some very nice guidelines that can be applicable elsewhere. One of the problems that are faced in many countries, and in big countries also between regions, is the non-unified criteria for mapping and assessing. And this is also a problem perhaps met in this project, REWET, and there is work going on this. There are new proposals, but yeah, sometimes it can pose some problems. But there are also good things happening, like the South-South cooperation. This is outside Europe, of course, so new places. Also in Brazil, mapping effort is going through. Also in other places, South Africa, I can remember the big lakes in Africa, and many other places. Now in the future, the main message is priority action and awareness. So there is no more time to lose. We need new binding restoration targets. We need to restore more habitats, and we need to revert drainage and keep these wetlands wet. So let the water be on the landscape. The big message from the Global Peatlands Assessment is this one. 88% of those 3% of coverage of the whole world is in good shape. We can say that. So they are wet, they are providing us a lot of ecosystem services, but still we need to keep an eye on it. We should stop the drainage. So no reclamation for bulk production, for farmland. Peatlands should be kept wet and functioning. Also, this is the big problem. 12% of them are degraded, and they emit much more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere than the other 88%. So this is where we should focus. We should restore where we can. Otherwise, they continue to be carbon sources instead of carbon sinks. Unfortunately, 6% of those 12%, so half of them, are lost. We cannot restore them any longer. So we talked about this, a lot of going on outside Europe. This is one of my favorite initiatives, the South-South initiative, but cooperation. But they also benefit a lot from science coming from Europe. So many of those guidelines, maybe many of those interchanges between science centers and also other entities is really working and bringing together this encompassing map of the world. The regional assessment of Europe is also published. This is chapter 5. I would strongly recommend reading it if possible. And here just some data for us to see. So in Europe, the peatlands cover about 6% of the whole land, so a little bit more than the average for the world, which is 3%. And they are mainly located on the British Isles, also Fendo, Scandinavia, and also in Northern Europe and Eastern Europe, you can say so. The first guideline we can extract from this is to continue the inventory and think about prioritization. So there are several ongoing projects in Europe right now. Also, many lands are paying attention to this topic and producing new teams and gathering new teams to produce new mapping about the extent and distribution, the type of land use and land cover. This is a very hot topic. Also, the drainage and the water table level. This is very, very important to keep peatlands in good shape. Also, a lot of restoration projects going on are being thought about. Data are being collected, but there is this difference of criteria that must be worked on. The quality of data is also not the same everywhere. So some countries really have good data, really good soil data and water data, but in other countries not so much. Like my country, I'm working on that. Also, these definitions sometimes can differ between a mire, which is more ecological, versus a peatland, which is more on a soil science perspective. Also, the harmonization correction of geometries is sometimes difficult. It's easy to set points on a map, but when you want to convert it into a polygon to map your wetland, sometimes problems are really tricky. And also the costs of ground truth data. In an ideal world, we would ground truth everything, but sometimes it's just not feasible. So some of the projects, the Scare Peat, Holy Soils, Wet Horizons, restoration of future wetlands, these are also wetlands, waterlands, very nice project as well, Restores for CS, multi-peat, and peat mothership. So a lot of interesting projects, all focusing on these topics. And this is more or less how it looks like in Europe. So the center of Europe has been working more, has more data, but the other countries must do their work. I've been working on this as well. So here we have a map of the Iberian Peninsula revision that I'm going to publish very soon. And yeah, more peatlands are going to be mapped and shown to the public. Number 2, restoration. So we are on the restoration decade of the United Nations. But we need to think a little bit about combining knowledge. We are now discussing in Europe the natural restoration law proposal, and it also focuses on peatlands. So peatlands are now seen as a key component of European Green Deal and also the new 2030 biodiversity strategy. They must be included. They cannot be left aside. And this is a very important movement in Europe because we haven't had such a big law since the big directives, the Habitat and the Bird Directive. So it's also an opportunity. It's not easy to do, but yeah, combining forces, we are getting somewhere. The situation is not the same everywhere, so there are the different pressures on peatlands, but yeah, it must be worked upon. And the Waterlands project also issued this policy briefing, which I strongly recommend reading because it contains very valuable information. Number 3, monitoring. So mapping and assessing is definitely not enough. We have seen this discussed in Montreal recently on CBD COP, and more work must be done. I bring 2 cases here. One is from my colleague Raquel here in the Iberian Peninsula. So we are already measuring the state of peatlands, but also a case from the Baltics, from the Greifswald Mire Centre. It's also work being done on this, and it must be kept doing. So REWET also can bring us more fresh data from several wetlands on Europe, and the movement is to not only assess but also propose measures to manage peatlands. And this brings us to the 4th guideline, knowledge and capacity. So interesting. Look at the results of these queries. People work. So many agents working with wet landscapes with peatlands care more about the habitat bird directives and water framework directive than, for instance, with international conventions like the CBD or the Ramsar Convention. This is interesting because it shows that there is still work to be done. still work to be done to raise awareness on the real importance of peatlands, because they are important for all of these. So policy and outreach, it's also quintessential in this work. We can assess, we can have very nice assessments, we can even monitor things, but if we don't act and if we don't bring society into the action, then the result will be bad. So a lot of this is going on. This is we have a picture here of the European Parliament on the day they were discussing the restoration law proposal. So more has to be done about this, and also art, culture, and science. So art can also play a very, very nice and very profitable aid in this public policy of managing our natural values, including peatlands. Economy, this cannot be left aside. Bringing here two very nice examples from Europe. One of them is the IUCN UK Peatland program. This is a must-read as well. A lot of information online, so very good materials. And also, I brought this example from France, which is very, very interesting. So continue the effort to collect the aggregate inventories, produce estimations of peatland, peaty soils, and swabs. This is also important, not just to work with very perfect, so to say, peatlands, but also with peaty soils and swabs. They also have very, very strong importance in ecosystem services. To produce a degradation classification, this is also very, very useful for economy, and to estimate emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions. And there are several strategies that can be followed, like determining factors that influence the peatlands price if you want to purchase those lands, the credits, carbon credits, but also biodiversity credits on a 3.0 version or 4.0 with more ethics involved and also other involvements of society. And if you really need to use peatlands for production, then do polyculture. They can be a very, very nice solution because the landscape is kept wet. This is very important, really. And now finally, for the second part of my presentation, the Peatland Atlas. So I brought here just a few ideas and some take-home messages. First of all, keep wetland peatlands wet. So peatlands must be wet. They should definitely not be drained. The ones that are the 88% we saw that are in good condition should be kept wet. And some of them are millennia old. This is a very slow pace working system, accumulating carbon for millennia, and it exists almost everywhere, except on the warm deserts. Peatlands are present almost everywhere. Of course, not in large quantities, it depends on the part of the world, but they exist. And as they are the most competent and effective carbon stores in non-marine ecosystems, even if they don't cover a large area, their preservation is really crucial. Also, drain peatlands should be re-wetted. So we see where most of the damage is, and Europe really has bad figures. Indonesia is doing amazing work reverting the situation. They have had massive problems with gigantic fires on the soil, a lot of clouds of smoke, respiratory problems for the population. So they're really doing nice work there, reverting the situation. But also elsewhere, we are facing damage, and this should be tackled. Wrong incentives. This is a big problem that happens in Europe, might happen some other places in the world, and the incentives sometimes are. Some cultures should not be subsidized, as they can provoke drainage and misuse of peatlands. So again, re-wet, drain peatlands, and if you want to use them wet. That's really important. Intensive use harms these carbon stores and can turn them into carbon sinks. So re-wetting them and conserving wet peatlands, these near natural peatlands in good condition, is really, really important. In some countries like Germany, this is a real big problem. So I really recommend the reading of the Peatland Atlas because it has, besides of these beautiful pictures, it has a lot of information on this. Also, peatlands can have this ecosystem service of provisional ecosystem service of providing goods and livelihoods. So many of these materials that were once overlooked can be actually brought into economy and provoke and bring profit and revenue, like reeds for thatching roofs, glass fiber from plants from wetlands, also alder as veneer on walls and furniture. So a lot can be done to incentive polyculture, to incentive preservation of wet peatlands. For more information, you can browse this Michel Foucault Foundation website, and the Peatland Atlas is downloadable from there. So in a nutshell, just a few recommendations and take-home messages. Expand protected area systems to include peatlands. Here in this map, we can see that many of them are outside protected areas. And also bear in mind that being inside a protected area doesn't necessarily mean they are properly managed. So we need also active conservation, not just passive conservation of setting an area as a protected area. Peatlands have a very complex functioning systems with special water features, soil features, and also vegetation cover, and they should be managed in a proper way. So expanding the protected area network, but also reaching out these entities that manage these places with the proper measures to manage peatlands. Phase out harmful operations on peatlands and REWET them. Develop and maintain data systems on peatland extent and uses. This is also very important. Form fair and transparent governance systems to cross sectors and empower stewardship by indigenous peoples and local communities. Really important in all continents. Support collaboration and engage in international networks and initiatives. This can also be proved very, very efficient. And finally, blend public and private funding through financial market instruments for peatlands. Just to finish, imagine 4 fingers of your hand, and in each tip of each finger, the word wet. So, peatlands must be wet. Peatlands must be conserved wet, so the wet peatlands should not be drained. Third, REWET drained peatlands. Think about the name of this project. And finally, if you need to use them wet. I brought to you not only this beautiful landscape, but also one of the images of the World Wetlands Day. This was some years ago, 2013. But I really love this idea of wetting the landscape. On a drop of water, it can be an ecosystem by itself. So leaving the water on the landscape is one of the key messages we need to work on. And I thank you for your attention. Any questions, please reach out to me. There's my email. And yeah, I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.